Hey guys, in this video we'll see how to integrate ChatGPT in Flutter. So this is what we are building. On the left hand side, this is our Flutter app embedded in the Flutter web, and on the right hand side, this is our ChatGPT interface. We go ahead and type our query in the query box here. So let's say we say hello and then press enter. On the right hand side, we can see that the ChatGPT response here, how can I help you? In the bottom, we can see the query history which we have asked till now, which is the same as hello and are you alive? And at the very bottom, we can see there is a floating action button. So let's say we ask about how is Flutter, and we can also press this floating action button, and this passes the query to the ChatGPT, and it should respond us back with what does it think. And in case you are curious how we made this happen, so stick around till the end. There are 3 steps involved to integrate ChatGPT in Flutter. The first one is we create our own ChatGPT server inside our local machine. The second one is we create our ChatGPT UI and integrate the server which we created in the previous step. And the final step is we create a Flutter web app and integrate the ChatGPT UI using a feature called as element embedding. So using this feature, we can pass our queries from the Flutter app to the ChatGPT UI. To create our own ChatGPT server, we first need to obtain a key from the OpenAI. So we need to either log in or sign up. After creating our account, we see that the OpenAI provides some applications by default, for instance, text completion, code completion, and much more. So next, we head over to our account and then we click on the View API keys. In my case, I already have one secret key, but in case you don't have, you just click on this plus create new secret key, and that API key will be generated. So as we have the API key now, it's time to create our server. So what we do is we create an empty folder called as server and open in VS Code. So we type in the command npm init-y, and what this does is it creates a package.json inside our server. Next, we install some of the modules like .env for handling the environment file, Express for creating a server, and NodeMon for listening to the server-based changes. And one last package of OpenAI. This OpenAI Node.js library was recently published and is available in the NPM. So we will be using this library to call the OpenAI endpoints. So next what we do is we create a .env file, and inside this file we create a key called as OpenAPI key. The value of this key should be equal to the one which you got from the OpenAI website. Next, we create a file called as server.js. We first get all the imports, for instance, Express.js, cors, .env, and the configuration and OpenAI API. Next, we initialize the .env config and create a configuration for our OpenAI. We pass in our OpenAI key to this configuration's API key parameter. Next, we initialize the OpenAI using the configuration as specified above. We initialize our app as Express, and now since our app is ready, we create a get endpoint and start our server on port 5001. But before that, we need to adjust something in the package.json. So inside the package.json script section, we replace the test with our server and paste the NodeMon server. The next thing we do is we remove the main parameter since there is no index.js. Now let's try to run our server using the command npm run server. And now we can see that something is not working. Heading back to the package.json, we forgot to add the parameter of type as module. And now if we run our command again, we see that our server is successfully started. Let's test our server, so we copy the link 5001 and paste it in our browser, and yes, we get the message hello there, which is basically the same message which we could get from here. So until now, we have successfully created a server and integrated the OpenAI. But now we need to create another endpoint which will allow us to send our queries to this endpoint. So for that, we need to head over to OpenAI and check the parameters or the model which we want to integrate. So inside the platform OpenAI, we click on the option examples. There are various options available, for instance Q&A, summarize, text command, etc. We would go with natural language to OpenAI API. We click on that option and then choose open in playground. So in this playground, in the middle there is some code, but on the right hand side basically there are the parameters which are getting used for this example. One of the important parameters here is the model, and if we click on this button, we see there are different models involved, and in our case we will going with Text DaVinci 003. And now we simply need to click on this button view code, which gives us a snippet in Node.js or any other language which we want. And now we just copy this entire thing and we can paste it in our server. We create a post endpoint which will accept the queries from our Flutter and send over to the OpenAI. Inside this endpoint, we extract the body from the request, and from this body, we extract the prompt. So what this means is we will be sending over a JSON body which will have the prompt parameter in the request. Going back to the OpenAI playground, we copy this snippet and paste inside our endpoint. And next, we need to replace this hard-coded prompt with the one our client is sending. So next, we send this request to the OpenAI endpoint, and the response we get back is in the form of response.data and text. And now if we try to test our endpoint, we use the curl command, we pass in the localhost 5001, and in the prompt section we pass in hello, and yes, we get the response back as hello, nice to meet you. So with this, we completed our server part, and let's keep this server running on the localhost 5001. For creating the ChatGPT UI, firstly, we need to have an HTML page with the relevant style CSS and the JavaScript file. I have gathered the relevant style CSS, JavaScript file and the assets. For creating our client HTML application, we will be using Vite and use this command to create our app. So in this case, we will be choosing template vanilla. The language we will be choosing JavaScript, and now we are done. In case you haven't installed the Vite, you can use this command to install. And as directed, we will be running these commands to complete our final installation. For running this application, we simply need to copy paste npm run dev, and if we head over to the package JSON, we see that there is a script dev which would be calling the Vite. After running the command, we see that we have a localhost 5173 and our client runs on this. So if we head over to the browser, we see that yes, the localhost 5173 is active. And as we can see at the bottom, we can type in any query and press enter. Now before integrating our local server in this application, let's have a quick walkthrough of the files which we just saw in the code. The first file is the index.html, and as we can see here, we have a parent div called as app, and inside this div we have an inner div chat container and a form with form container. If we inspect the HTML page, we see that the parent div is app, which covers the entire screen. Then there is an inner div called as chat container, which is the upper half. And then there is a form in which the user can type any query. We also have imported style CSS and our JavaScript file script.js. We also have some assets in the form of bot, send, and user SVGs. In the style.css, we have the relevant style for each of the HTML elements, and this you can simply copy paste. And finally, we have our script.js file, which is almost 117 lines of code. So in these statements, we import the assets bot and user. Next, we get the access to form and chat container using document query selectors. The first function loader is used to show the dots when the user types any query and is waiting for the response. So these are the dots which we were talking about. The function type text is used to show the response being typed by the bot. So this can be seen here when the response is being typed. The function chatStripe takes in 3 parameters: isAI, value, and unique ID. So as determined by this isAI parameter, it shows the image to be bot or the user. As we can see here, when the response is given by the bot, it is taking the bot image, and the user typing query is taking the user image. If we can observe carefully, the CSS class of the user text hello is different than the bot's answer, and on the right hand side we can see that there is a unique ID associated to this div. And last, there is a function called as handle submit, and inside this function we generate new form each time when this function is called. Next, we generate the chat stripe, and finally we also generate the unique ID. In this chat stripe function, we pass in false, that means this is not from AI, and also we get the value of that prompt, which is the user query. We generate a unique ID and attach it to the chat containers HTML and pass in true to the chat stripe. And next, we need to write the server integration, wherein we pass the user query and send it to our server, which is hosted at 5001. We use the fetch API from the JavaScript framework and call in our local host. Inside the body, we send a JSON prompt with the value as data.getPrompt. We check if the response is okay, then we do the action. Otherwise, we pass in that hey, something went wrong. And if the response is okay, we await the response.json, get the data, and then extract the bot parameter. This parsed data is then sent over to the function type text, which is used to show the response being typed by the bot. And finally, this handle submit is attached to 2 event listeners. The first one is the submit button, and the second one is the press of enter. So for testing it now, we run the command npm run dev. It runs our app on 5173, and if we click on this link, we have the same HTML app, but this time this is integrated with our server. And let's say if we ask it some query, it calls our endpoint 5001 and gives us this answer. And we ask it again for how is Flutter, and then it responds accordingly. The final step is to take the UI pieces, the styles, and the JavaScript from this client application and then embed into our Flutter web app. We start first by creating a Flutter app called as ChatGPT embedding, and since we are only targeting web, we specify the platforms to be web. And if we run this, we should get a simple plain old counter web app. For integrating ChatGPT inside this app, we will be using a concept called as element embedding. Element embedding was announced at the Flutter Forward event. In case you want to learn about element embedding in detail, I have a video exactly for the same. So inside the element embedding feature, the Flutter team allows Flutter content to be added to any standard WebDiv components. For using the element embedding, firstly, we need to ensure we are on the master channel of Flutter, and secondly, we should have the Dart 3.0. Next, we install the JS package, and by this JS package, we will be able to enable seamless interoperability between JavaScript and Dart code. In the project itself, we only have two Dart files, the main.dart and the gpt.dart. The main.dart is basically the entry point of our application. In the gpt.dart, we have the my homepage class, and this is a stateful widget, and hence there is a state associated with it. We import the package JS in this class and also the JS util. We also annotate our homepage state with the annotation JS export. By doing this annotation, the Dart classes are marked as exportable and can be called in the JavaScript side. We remove the counter components which come by default, and instead we create a new floating action button. If we run the app now, we should see plain Flutter and ChatGPT with the floating action button as send, and there is no action as of now. Since we are aiming for this UI, we need to tweak our existing web folder. We should also have the Flutter app on the left hand side and the ChatGPT UI in the right hand side. So in our Flutter app, in the web folder, we target the assets first, and basically we copy paste the all three SVGs which we got from our Vite application. The next, we copy the style CSS from also the Vite application. Inside our index.html, we import the style.css. Inside our body tag, we have a parent div with id as parent. So this div comprises of two inner divs. The first is with the id as Flutter target, and this will host our Flutter app. And the second div is with the id app, which will have our ChatGPT UI. Let's save our progress here and try to run the app. So after running, we see that on the left hand side, we have the designated area for Flutter app, and on the right hand side, we have the area for the ChatGPT UI. But now we don't see the Flutter app at all, so let's fix that first. We add this script inside our index.html. Now let's explain this script. We access the Flutter target using document query selector, and this Flutter target is nothing but our div which would be hosting our Flutter app. Next, we call the load entry point, which is responsible for downloading the main.js. This load entry point basically calls the onEntryPointLoaded callback, and this callback receives an engine initializer object as its parameter. This engine initializer then calls the initialize engine function that returns a promise with AppRunner object. And finally, using this app runner, we call the run app that is basically responsible for running the Flutter app. And if we run the app again, we are able to see the Flutter app on the left hand side along with the ChatGPT UI on the right hand side. And with this, it's time to integrate the JS functions. So this is the file which we will create, and if we click on this, we see that we have set up a channel for JS interop with Flutter. And before we forget, we head over to the index.html and then import our new JS file. And in case you are curious, this state set is basically the app state which will be exposed via the JS package from the Dart side. There are times when we need to copy paste a snippet and share with our teams. Introducing Pieces, a code snippet manager we have been waiting for. It's beautifully integrated in your work environment, for instance, VS Code, JetBrains, or even Google Chrome. They have a desktop app for Windows, Apple, and Linux users. Let's install the Pieces desktop app for macOS, which is entirely free. We can see all our snippets by just scrolling down here. For sharing the snippet with the teams, you just click on this button here. So this button creates a shareable link. For getting more information from a snippet, you just click on this menu button here. So this gives us the description of the snippet, related tags to the snippet, and also any links related for this snippet. You can also track your activities in this app by clicking on this workflow activity button. They have a plugin for VS Code called as Pieces for VS Code. On installing that plugin, we can see all the languages based snippets. So for instance, for the JavaScript, I have these snippets, Dart, I have these. They also have a suggested materials section in which they have some suggestions. For instance, this function generate unique ID. We head back to the pieces where we saved the snippet and copy the same. And now in the Dart side, we need to paste it inside the init state. Using this create.export, a Dart object is marked exportable and can be accessed from the JS side. This set property is coming from the JSUtil package, which goes the same for the call method. We also define a method addHandler, which we can get it from the snippet here and paste it in the Dart side. So basically what this does is, this will register a handler which would be written in the JavaScript file, and the name of that function should also be addHandler. In the JavaScript side, we first get access to the state of the Flutter app and store it inside a variable called appState. So first we access the form element using the query selector, which we can see here in the index.html. We access the chat container, which is the div present in the HTML app. And then we initialize an instance of form data by passing in the form. It's time for us to refer the client HTML app. We open our script.js file from the client HTML project. So from here, we need to get some functions. So we save this snippet on the VS Code by clicking on Save Pieces. Heading over to the Flutter project, we access the snippet from the pieces, copy it, and save it inside our JS file. Similarly, we do the same for the generate unique ID function. So we highlight it and save to pieces. As per the comments, this function basically generates a unique ID for each message div. Next, we also take the function chatStripe, highlight and save. And same from our Flutter side, we access the snippets and paste it. And before we forget, we also take in the handle submit function. So this function gets invoked when the user presses the send button from the Flutter app, or when the user clicks the enter button from the keyboard. Looking inside the handle submit function, we first get the value entered from the user using formData.getPrompt. We pass in false, meaning the input is from the user, and assign it to our chat container. Next, we generate the unique ID for the message div, and we pass in true to the chatStripe, meaning the input is from the bot. And finally, using the fetch API, we create a request to our localhost server, which has the ChatGPT running. We pass in the prompt from the user and store back the response in a response variable. Based on that variable, if the request response is okay, we get the JSON, parse it, and get the ChatGPT's response. Otherwise, we show that something went wrong in our HTML. Inside our GPT.dat file, we create a text controller now and place it inside our column now. And if we run the app now, we see our text controller. So next we create a function text input callback, and this basically sets the value to the text query, So basically whatever we type in the text controller is getting saved inside our text query variable. And this is then passed in to the onSubmitted function of text field. So now we have the latest text query in the variable here. We need to export it to the JS side using the JS export annotation. In the JavaScript side, we register a handler called updateText using the add handler, which is defined here in the .dat file. Inside the updateText state, we first set the value from the user and set it to the form using formData.set. And next we call in the handle submit by passing in the form. We run the app now and let's type in some query. So for instance, say hello, and we press enter. So first thing we note, nothing happens. So let's check it. So we forgot to add the event listeners for submit or even the enter button press. So we add it now. We refresh our app and again type in the query, but we see that nothing happens again. So for fixing this, we add a stream controller in our .dat file. We listen to the stream using the stream controller inside our add handler, and we pass in the handler function which we get it from the JavaScript side. And also inside our text input callback function, we add a null event to the stream controller. And we also forgot to add the text input callback to our floating action buttons on pressed event. And if we run the app now and type in our query as hello and press enter, we see that the ChatGPT replies back the print hello. So now let's change the query to hello, how are you? And now the ChatGPT is saying, I'm doing well, thank you for asking. So we notice that if we want to type in a new query, we need to again select all of this, press back and type again. So let's fix this. We write the function handleClear, which clears the text controller's text. We attach this function on the floating action button as well as on submitted. We run the app again and type in hello. So now the ChatGPT responds us, I'm doing well, and we also see this box gets cleared. Currently, we are not able to get what are the queries which we have asked in the Flutter side. So let's fix that. We create a variable chat history of type list of string, and whenever we submit any value, that also gets added to this list of string, along with when we click on the send floating action button. And finally, we show the chat history by looping over the list and then showing the items in the list one by one. Running the app again, we type in any query, let's say he, and now we can see the history of the things we have asked. So now we asked another thing as how is Flutter. We see the history which says how is Flutter, and simultaneously we are given back the response. And lastly, there are some snippets. For instance, this function which we highlight now, share via pieces link. Opening it on the browser, now you guys can see it anytime and share this with your friends. That's it from this video guys, and thanks guys for watching.